Alright, this is a video for the rear rotor and brake pad change for Maserati Levante. There's a lot of DIYs out there for the front brakes, which are very straightforward. There's two little pitfalls here with the rear brakes that make it more difficult than your average brake swap and rotor swap, and I'm going to show you what those two things are. The first is that there's an electronic parking brake, and you need a service tool to disengage that and put the electronic parking brake into service mode. I'm going to do this without that since I don't have that particular tool, or rather since my tool apparently doesn't work on Maserati. And then there's a separate issue here, and I'll show you what that is in a minute. First and foremost, you can notice that I have my jack here under the arm, and I have a jack stand here which is going to hold the load at the actual jack point of this car, and I'll show you why I'm doing that also. If you have two pairs of jacks, you don't need to do this. You can just jack up here, and you can use the other jack later for this arm, but I'm going to show you why I'm doing it this way here in a moment. Let's get this wheel off first. This is just going to use 17mm bolts, and we can just pop this guy off. Alright, so tires off. Here we got our rotor, here we got our caliper, same as in the other, but there's some little issues here. Issue number one, this whole little black thing is the electronic parking brake. That's the actuator. You want to get that disconnected so that when you're messing around with this caliper, the pistons doesn't suddenly start pushing out on you. You do that by taking just a flathead screwdriver. You want to push out this gray little tab, and once that's out, you can kind of stick your driver right here in this little notch and force it back. This whole thing is typically covered with a lot of road dirt and grit, so it doesn't come off very easily. But once you get that off, it looks just like this. Issue number two is, in order to take off the rotor, you're going to have to take off this whole entire caliper frame. You take the caliper frame off by two bolts. That is this guy right here. That is a E18 torx bolt, which looks just like this. Comes right off. But the issue here is that this control arm is in the way, or end link, I guess is what it's called. And in order to get to this bolt, you're really going to have to take this off. And to take this off, this whole suspension is under load. And all you need to do really is remove this 16mm bolt, but you need to make sure that this whole suspension doesn't spring loose on you. That's why my jack is here holding everything. That's why I have this other jack stand right there holding the car up. This is holding the suspension in place. I'm going to take this bolt off. This is also going to help later on when we go to put that bolt back. We're going to jack the car and move this whole arm up to the exact position so we'll be able to put this bolt back easily. So these are your two problems here that make it really difficult to do this on your own. And now that you know how to do it, it's all going to be a piece of cake. The rest is pretty standard. We're going to first start by taking the caliper off. We do that by just taking this cap off right here, and there's another one here at the bottom. Just take these caps off, and we're going to take these bolts out here. These bolts on the other side, they're 7mm Allen wrench bolts like this, and we just unscrew it, and we're going to take this caliper off. It's going to give us a little more room to work around. Okay, taking the caliper off. So now I've got these unbolted here with my 7mm hex head. These come out. When they go back in, you probably want to throw a little bit of caliper grease on these so that they slide well. These are out. There's this clip here. I kind of yank this out too, so this just kind of retains here, and it hooks in right there. And you kind of just really just yank the thing out. Once that's out, everything should just come right off. And that's it for this caliper for the time being. I'm gonna just set that carefully here to the side. I don't want to mar the paint. So now we got a little more room to work over here. And again, we're going to just take out this thing here so we can swing this arm out of the way and get at this top bolt right there. And then there's this bottom one right there. And then this frame will come off and we'll be able to take out the rotor. So here's a little tip for you that's going to save you some grief later on. That was a problem for me when I did the other side. Get this out of the way. First of all, if you have one of these ratchets instead of a socket, it gives you a lot more room because you got this little suspension strut here in the way. And you want to just start ratcheting off. But what you want to make sure is that as you do so, you're careful, because this is a pretty long bolt. It'll go pretty far back, and what's going to happen is that you're going to get trapped. You're not going to be able to take this wrench off if it's stuck between the strut and the bolt. It's going to be a really tight fit, and then it's going to be a pretty big hassle. So just be very mindful of how far out you're going. Kind of periodically check a little bit like I'm doing. The further out you get, when it starts getting tight, you're going to have to just do it the old-fashioned way. Just start taking it off. I think I got some more space here, so I'll do that for now. Anyways, just don't end up stuck, because that's going to be a really big hassle for you. And I'm just about there and barely able to get off. And we'll just take this off the rest of the way. But that's just another one of those annoying things about working in tight spaces, and you're going to run up against that when you go to do this. So here's this bolt. You can see it's kind of already unloaded a little bit. That's why it's crooked. It's actually pretty tough to take out. So we're going to have to let this car down just ever so slightly. You know, again, that's why I make sure I have the jack stand here under the jacking point. And we're going to just get this a little touch down here. And maybe even a little more here. So that's actually a little bit too much. Tighten it up. Up just a tiny bit. That's pretty good. Now we can take that out and we can move this whole thing right out of the way. So that's great. Now we're gonna just pop off these two bolts here, number 1, number 2, and we'll take this frame off. Alright, so finished taking these bolts off here. And this frame just comes right off. Should be no issue at all. Well, take off the other bolt here too. Still sitting in there. Whole thing comes right off. So again, that's these bolts here. They're E18. You need a socket like that. Really recommend having something like this. Big 1/2-inch breaker bar to get those off. They are pretty tough bolts. One thing I forgot too, so this is my pad. It's pretty shot. You can see here actually is where the brake wear sensor is supposed to be attached to, but it wasn't. It already fell out because it's time to change the pads. But there's also this sensor here attached to the caliper. So that little guy needs to go too. Keep that in mind. So let's take the rotor off. Pretty easy. It's just a 5mm hex head, Allen, however you want to call it. Take that off. Once that guy's out, this comes right out. So in the past I've seen these on pretty tight. You got to whack them with a hammer. For whatever reason, these come right off. And I don't mind that one bit. So we're going to get the new rotor on. We're going to just put these bolts back. We're going to put the frame back. We're going to get this arm back in, and then we'll be ready to move on to the caliper here. Alright, so new rotor is on. just fit that on, put this little 5mm hex head on there, put the frame back. This is the part number for the rear caliper, or sorry, rear rotor, excuse me. Only M parts go on this car. Got this frame back on. Now it's time to put this end link back in here. Again, we want to just make sure this is nice and straight and it's easy to get in there. So this looks like it's kind of a little bit off. I want to bring this up just maybe a touch or so. Straighten that out. Should be able to get right in there. I think that's good enough to get my wrench on it. And this arm does also kind of move around a little bit, so you can kind of get that on there the right way. So again, very handy to have this jack here to be able to move this whole thing around, because there's quite a bit of pressure and weight on there. Right now there's not really enough room for me. Get some more hand tightening on here. And because I have this so well aligned, it's really easy just to screw this in by hand, which saves a lot of time. Because now I can get my wrench on it. And I'll just do this even more. So it's very important to have this well aligned, otherwise you're in for a lot of grief. So this is pretty good. I can get my wrench right in there, tighten that bad boy up. Nice and tight. And that's it. So we're good. The rotor is on. Moving on to the caliper here. So here's our caliper. I like to just kind of take the padding from the rotor box, throw it over here so I don't have to worry too much about the paint. These nice red calipers. First and foremost, again, there's this brake wear sensor for the pad. It's done, so let's just get it out of there. Adios. Next thing we have to do is get this piston compressed all the way in so that we're going to be able to put the caliper back on here once the pads are in. That's not going to happen unless you have this service tool to either use the actuator to back this thing back in, or else I'm going to show you how to do it manually. So the very first thing we're going to do is take the actuator off, and it comes off with just these two bolts, and these, if I'm not mistaken, are also 5mm bolts. Let's check that out here. Yep, so those are 5s. This is coming off right now. Okay, so we got our little 5mm hex heads off. We're going to take a screwdriver and kind of just work this whole thing off. Actuator is off. So what we have here is this kind of greasy torx bit. What we're going to do with this whole thing is we're going to turn this clockwise until it doesn't turn any longer. Just keep winding it. And that's it. It stops. You don't have to really work it in or anything like that. But what that allows us to do now is to just compress this manually the regular old-fashioned way. Now, I'm going to try again here after I press stop in the intervening time. I'm going to try and screw this back in. But on the other side, I screwed and screwed and screwed, and it didn't go in. And I ended up just using just a regular compression tool to push it back in. It went in just fine. So I'm going to just verify that that's the case. This doesn't actually screw in, even though it has the markings for a typical screw-in piston, but we'll see here in a minute. So I gave this a shot with a turning piston wrench here. It has these notches that fit perfectly here for the piston. It just turned and turned and didn't go in. So we're doing this just the old-fashioned way. I have a regular caliper tool and we're just pushing this in. You can see I don't even have to use a lot of force. It just goes right in. So that's great. No reason to go nuts. You can see this guy is getting right in there. And that's it. Pistons all the way in. That's all it takes. So the main thing, again, you just want to get this thing ratcheted all the way in, and that's going to allow this piston to move in. If you don't do that, this piston's going to go in a little bit and it's going to reach some stopping point, and you're going to be sitting there scratching your head wondering why. Then you're going to watch this video again, realize you're going to have to torque this down all the way clockwise till it stops. Then it goes right in. Everything's a snap. We're going to put this actuator back on, get these two bolts back in there, and that's it. We'll put the pads on and we'll put the caliper on, call it a day. Okay, pads. Here are some genuine OEM Maserati pads. Just goes right in here, piece of cake. So this one here with the little clip and the sensor, this is on the left side that has a sensor. The right side will look just like this, but it won't have a wire going off to it and there won't plug into anything. But this one here with the clips, the other side will have the clips too, even if it doesn't have this wire. That one always goes here on the inside. That's it. It just sits in there. We're going to feed it right through this hole, and then it has a little clip here on the plug. It's getting a little dark, so it's not focusing well. There you go. So this slides right onto this little part right there, and it's perfect just to be a hanger, and then that'll plug right in over there. So we're going to just throw this caliper on. We're going to screw these 7mm hex heads back in right here and here. We'll plug this guy in, and that'll be that. Okay, so we got our caliper here. It's bolted back on. Again, we used our 7mm hex head just to tighten these guys here and here. Don't forget to put these caps on so that there's no of that road gunk getting in there and messing with the slide bolts, because this should all kind of float here and move freely, so don't forget those. I left this unplugged just so I can show you. It kind of just slides right on there. Doop. And then this guy plugs right in. There we go. That's the wear sensor for the pad. It's back in there. Good for another 35,000 miles or so. We can plug this guy back in here too. This is, again, the electronic parking actuator. That's plugged back in there. And then the last thing is just this little clip here. And the way this goes in again is you just kind of hook these guys in the holes, and then this whole thing kind of goes around. Goes in there first, and then you kind of just gotta force it over there. There you go. And that's it. That's a wrap. So just jack this guy back up, pull out the stand, or put the wheel on first. I would put the wheel on first. And tighten this all up, and that's it. That is a wrap for the Maserati Levante rear rotor and rear brake pad swap out. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions.